everybody to the afternoon, the final afternoon of Conclave. 2 talks to go, this one after that, and then we have Mass. And for our 1:30 session, we have the relatively newly Reverend Deacon Angie Wisk-Nowell with a talk entitled Knowing Better, Doing Better, Spiritual Direction and Preventing Cult Formation. Angie was raised in a non-religious family, but has been captivated by spirituality for as long as she can remember. She has practiced in a variety of forms of Christianity, ranging from evangelical, mysticism, and Gnosticism. And when she discovered the concept of the feminine divine in Christianity, she was hooked and has been exploring this deeply since 2006. Angie has been a member of the parish of St. Joseph of Arimathea since 2017, though we actually met 10 years prior to that in the parish context. And it's the intervening time which informs some of this talk. She has a BA in history and an MBA, and she lives with her husband and 2 small children in Calgary, Alberta. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Reverend Angie.
Great. Thank you, Your Eminence. So I will try to, let's see, we do screen share and PowerPoint. There we go. Share. Okay, can people see my slides?
Yep.
Fantastic. Okay, so this talk has developed over several weeks, and one of the benefits of going near last is I get to draw on other things that were said during conclave, so you'll be hearing smatterings of that through this presentation. I did change the title a little bit to Spiritual Community and Preventing Cult Formation. As it developed, that seemed to be more where I ended up. Anyway, so I set out to answer a question: why do cults keep happening? It's very easy to look at the AJC and go, we're not a cult. There's no problem. We don't need to really address this, and we're not going to become a cult. And arguably, we have a lot of things already implemented to keep that from happening. However, there are 2 things that I would argue that really, it's almost like the pipeline is primed for cults to develop within a spiritual community, and that's not really a fault of anybody. It's more of a, we've got a lot of history and we've got a lot of how people connect that come together when we form community. And one thing that is important to remember is that we're wired for connection. And no matter where we go or what we do, we're going to want to connect to one another. And sometimes those connections can run afoul. And the other thing too is we have a really long church history, and some of that church history is rich and beautiful, and we draw on these traditions, and some of it is really harmful. And I think in the spirit of a Jungian, going on to our previous topic, taking a Jungian approach of really staring our shadow in the face, I think can go a long way. And even having conversations like these can go a long way to preventing cult formation. So where I'm going to start is exploring human connection, or how people connect. And I came across this information. You'll see a link at the bottom. There's a psychologist, Dr. Gordon Neufeld, and he really looks into attachment theory in relation to families. So what happened is I was 35 and I had my first child, and we got through the birth experience, and then it was like, well, now what do I do? Now I have to raise this person. And I started looking deeply into attachment theory as far as how families are developed and grow. And as I was looking at how families grow, I was like, oh, this looks really familiar to communities as well. And there's sort of 3 lines of exploration that I'm going to go through. One is how families attach to one another, because that's going to inform how communities attach to one another. And then I want to take it one step further and look when this community attachment goes from positive to malefic. So what does that attachment root look like when it's gone haywire? So there are 6 key roots of attachment that Dr. Neufeld really discusses: proximity, sameness, belonging, significance. He says love. In this context, I'm going to use love/care, and secrets. And what's neat about these attachments is that, like in families or in healthy communities, you need all 6 of these things to function. If you are missing one of these roots, that connection doesn't hold. It's tenuous, it's difficult. If you don't have these 6 things within your family, the family fragments, if you don't have these 6 things in your intimate relationships or even your close friendships, they can fragment, again, in a healthy community. However, in a cultic situation, these 6 things can be turned against you and become really harmful. So how do we, as a spiritual community that want to be connected to one another, handle these things so that we have the healthy version of it without it turning negative, that we can have the roots without then being root bound by them? So I'm going to go through each one, starting with proximity. Now, I'm going to talk about it from a family context because that's how I first learned the information, then community, then cultic. So proximity with a new family. You bring a new person, a new child into your family, and they talk about holding your baby all the time. So proximity, that new person. Oh, I'm going to back up one step with these 6 roots. These 6 roots, what they're intended to do is provide the groundwork for maturation. So you have a newborn, and how do you get them into a functioning adult? Well, you provide that nourishment through these 6 roots of attachment. And the goal is that that infant then moves into an independent adult that is then capable of providing that same nourishment. So also with a community, we provide these roots so that that individual is then able to go forth in the world and be strong and contribute. So I receive a lot of nourishment from my spiritual community, and therefore I am able to give more to my family, to my friends, etc. Now, in a cultic situation, these 6 roots start to take away, and instead of nourishing, they're depleting. So again, sorry for the backtrack, but I thought that was important to qualify. And as you go through, they develop complexity. So one builds upon another. One is simple, and they go into the complex. So just bear that in mind as we go through. So sorry about that. Let's back up into proximity. So with a newborn baby, you have proximity. You have them close. What that can look like is holding the child all the time. So you see newborn parents, they're exhausted, they're overwhelmed because of, frankly, that proximity. It is that, they went from internal proximity to now trying to get that externally. As a child grows and develops, they need less and less of that proximity until they're a teenager and they barely want to speak to you anymore. However, you need to still provide that link to proximity for them. But again, it's something that is fundamental. You cannot form a relationship without some type of proximity. In our case, in a community case, we meet regularly. So the parish of St. Joseph, we meet biweekly. I have a seminary mentor. We meet, monthly, hopefully. Sometimes it goes longer, sometimes shorter, but we have proximity in that relationship. In a cultic situation, that proximity becomes constant. And the goal of that proximity is to essentially force out any other relationship. And this is something that happens slowly over time. So you start off going to a meditation once a week, once a month, and then the proximity increases, it increases and increases to one day you realize, oh my goodness, I have lost proximity with others. And that can be a difficult thing. So if we're just sort of feeling that experience of family proximity, healthy community, and then cultic. The second one is sameness. So what that looks like is as the child develops and becomes a toddler and is starting to learn language, it is very helpful for that young person to hear words of sameness. So when you see them trying on a new thing, a new activity, you do that just like mom, or you do that just like dad, and you create that bridge of sameness for them. in that very simple way, it gives them a link to, I'm connected to something more than just myself. I'm not alone. I'm not just proximity, but I'm also like you. This is a very powerful thing in community. So we're a Gnostic community. We have all kinds of different ideas, but at the end of the day, we do share some sameness. We talk about the demiurge. We talk about Gnostic thought through history. We have a sameness in the language we carry. So when we come together in this context, we have similar language, essentially sameness, because that way, that way we can have some commonality and some language that we can communicate. Now, even in our community that is very loosely connected, the ministers have sameness in the way we dress. So, the minister, we're all wearing collars. This is an example of sameness. When we do our liturgy, when you go to an AJC church across, you're going to see that sameness. Now, in cultic situations, that sameness is demanded. Sorry, I was just kind of checking out the chat. I'm going to have to put that aside so I can keep my focus. Sorry, but that sameness is demanded. So if you do anything that is outside of that sameness, suddenly you're finding yourself ostracized, and that sameness can then be, instead of supporting, it can take you away from any other relationship. The next one, as the child grows, they're part of belonging. So when that child grows, you say to them, I really love that you belong to our family. These words of belonging and inclusivity help that child when they go out into school. They know that they go to school, they're in their classroom during the day, but at the end of the day, they come home and they belong to their family. Neufeld talks about how important it is to constantly affirm this belonging to young children, especially as they learn to leave the home, or even as they get older, making sure that as they get out with their friends, that they feel that sense of belonging with their family, that they can belong to something outside of their peer group, so that if their peer group tests their own personal boundaries, they know they belong to something that feels safe. Again, in our community, we welcome people. We say to them, you belong here. We welcome you. We encourage what you have to say. Thank you for coming. In cultic environments, that belonging means you belong only to us. So at the expense of, if you're going to belong to us, you can belong to no one else. This is a really effective way of keeping people stuck in these situations that by all rational accounts seem ridiculous, but that sense of belonging really, really goes far for holding people together. Next, moving on is into significance. So as your child grows, you are constantly affirming to them, you matter to me. So with children as they grow up, I'm in 5-year-old land right now. So what that looks like is, Mommy, you're the worst. And I respond to her with, yes, and you matter to me. So no matter what she says, no matter what she does, I always turn it back to her being significant to me, her mattering to me. That way, that relationship is bridged. So when she knows that no matter what happens, she is significant to me, she matters to me. The 3-year-old, he'll get there in his own time. Now, in our community, again, significance. We hold significance in different communities. We each have our role to play. So in our community, Jason is sort of our but why person. This is significant to our community. His contribution is significant to us. I'm just calling him out because that's an easy one. But again, no matter, going back to, it's just a very important thing to make sure that root of significance is provided for and is nurtured in the community setting. What happens in cultic environments is that significance, again, is turned on the person. So only we care about you. You only matter to us. Your family of origin doesn't care about you like we care about you. Your family of origin is no longer significant. We are the significant ones in your life. And they never really cared for you like we can care for you. Moving on to love and care, this root is much deeper. You know, we it's interesting with children, they're not able to really communicate the concept of love or care for one another until they're about 4, 5, 6. You know, younger children are able to show care, and they have blips of what that looks like, but it really takes a lot of time to develop love and care. That is something that caring we saw in our community this morning with the passing of our sister Constance. She cared for us, we cared for her. This was a significant root that we shared with her. And you know, when she was on seminary calls with me, she would always ask, "Oh, can I see your children? Can you put them on the screen for a minute?" That was a expression of care that she had. She didn't know me really deeply personally, but she always made a point to express that care. That's what we do in community when we see each other. We light up, we get happy to see one another because there is that sincere care that develops in these roots of attachment. In cultic situations, as I'm sure you can imagine, this care turns into control. So or abuse. So what can happen is my way of showing my love is by saying the tough things, by saying the hard teachings. And what that really is I'm telling you I love you, but I'm going to publicly abuse you. And this happens all the time in cultic situations. It's a really tricky one to navigate. And finally, moving into secrets. Now, what this looks like is as children grow, children will start to do things that are secret. So they go to school, they do something at school that they know was a little bit naughty. And if there's a strong attachment between you and that child, what will happen is they will tell you what happened at school and they don't even want to, but they'll sort of tattle on themselves. And also as they grow into teenagers, they're going to do things that they know you're not going to approve of. They're going to try to not tell you, and then eventually they will tell you. But what that's really doing from an attachment perspective is that secret that child is sharing with you is them trying to navigate how to handle these hard situations. So by them sharing their troubles with you or their secrets, they're asking you for a resource. So we can see in teenage years where this root will break down, where a child will come to you with something that they've done that's wrong. Let's say they stole $20 out of your wallet and then they were feeling really bad about it, so they confessed to you. And if you respond to them with, "Wow, thank you for telling me that, that maybe wasn't the best choice. How can we navigate through this?" That's one way of approaching it. If they tell you that secret and your response is, "I can't believe you stole from me," and blowing up on them and getting really angry with them, that's essentially a betrayal of trust. That child will then learn not to tell you their secrets. So that root will be broken. That is a particularly tenuous root with children and as they mature. Now let's look at what secrets are in this community context. Secrets in our community context is the sacrament of confession. This is a significant sacrament. This has long-reaching implications on how we relate to clergy, how we relate to the divine. That is, in our community, the sacrament of confession is sacred. So what happens in that sacrament stays in that sacrament. In cultic environments, confessions are used against people. So you'll share a secret, you'll share a confession, and then if you betray the cultic environment, that secret will be used against you. It will be revealed in a public way, and it will be used against you. And it is extremely damaging, and it damages not just the community, but it also damages people's individual relationships with the divine. So when we look at this, we're wired to share with one another in this way. And there are healthy ways to do it, and there are unhealthy ways to do it. And I think it's important to acknowledge that this is constantly happening in our communities and our relationships. And so we get, by looking at it a little bit closely, we can take a moment and judge, where am I? How am I doing with this? So am I, with the proximity one, have I missed do I want to be part of the community, but I kind of keep missing it? So you're going to fall out of proximity. That root will shallow. So then you change it. Have I told people that I'm happy to belong to them? You can move through these out of sequence, just to sort of get a sense of them within yourself. You can also look at these in your personal relationships. And then finally, it's important to look at them. Am I building these roots a little too deeply? Are these roots out of context? Am I putting too much significance in a pot where it might not be super healthy? And is it taking from other areas of my life? So constantly navigating these roots, they're always going to be in flux throughout all of your relationships, but just really paying attention to how they're operating can be a very powerful way to do that reflective work as to how your community is functioning and how you are functioning in that community. So moving on to church history as being a double whammy as far as why cultic relationships can form within our context. As a Gnostic community, we don't have a huge lineage as far as what relationships look like in the church, in the Gnostic church, but we do have a very long history of what it looked like in the Catholic Church. And we see our liturgies mirroring or resembling the Catholic liturgies. We see we look to our history as sort of guideposts, and I think it's important to look at some of the trickier, stickier spots. So I'm going to be looking at martyrs, ascetics, monastics, and priests, and how these examples, while moving and powerful, can lead to cultic tendencies if we don't keep a close eye on them. So starting with martyrs, we haven't, the last martyr we sort of talk about in a Gnostic context is from World War II, but I'm going to go way far back to early Christianity, looking at the martyrs in the sort of pre-legal, pre-empire Roman times. One martyr in particular, her name was Felicityus. She was somebody that Father Luke Dysinger talks about in his in his spiritual direction lectures. These are excellent lectures. If you're a future seminarian, you are going to spend a lot of time in these lectures. But he talks about one martyr, Felicityus, and she was in a Roman jail for about 8 months. She was pregnant when she went in, and she gave birth while she was in jail. And basically, they allowed some of her family members to try to talk some sense into her. Her father would be allowed to visit her with her newborn baby and say, hey, you need to give up on this Christian. This is crazy, my friend. Please stop with this Christian stuff. Just renounce and they'll let you out of prison and nothing bad will happen. They'll let you move on. But what she did instead was she went into the arena. There was 4 other people with her. And she, left her newborn child behind. And it's one of these horrible stories, but it's important to remember that these are our foundations as far as the holy people, the holy foundation of our church. Her brother was also allowed to visit her, and she would tell him all of these amazing visions she had about she was about to step on the head of a dragon and rise up on Jacob's ladder and be embraced with the divine. So even though she was going through this difficult thing, she had to leave her child behind, she was willing to do it for her love of Christ. Now, we look at that and we're like, well, we don't do that anymore. But again, it's at the foundation of how we understand how to relate to the divine. These stories inform our current psyche, and it's not just mythology. These things really happen. So it holds a really deep current in our consciousness. The next, we move on to ascetics. The Saint Anthony of 356, he talks about if you're going to have if you're going to pursue a deep spiritual life, he says, I know of monks who fell after much toil and lapsed into madness because they trusted in their own works. And he goes on to say, if possible, for every step a monk takes, for every drop of water he drinks in his cell, he should entrust the decision to an old man. And again, this laying down your life of total obedience to your spiritual teacher, you know, we're more freewheeling in our organization, but again, that is laying down the foundation for how people relate to their spiritual life. Finally, we move on to monastics. So the Rule of Saint Benedict. This was written in 516, and they continue to read it. Father Luke is part of the Benedictine order, and he talks very lovingly of the rules of Saint Benedict. And some of those rules include things like the first step of humility is obedience without hesitation. He goes on to say that it is important to be obedient in things that are contrary. And finally, the most important thing for a monk is to be obedient even when it goes against his judgment. Now, rules of St. Benedict also include things like an abbot should listen to newcomers. He should be open to receiving the feedback of his congregation. It's not all one-sided. However, these notions of obedience and these notions of laying down our own knowing for the guise of somebody else is very powerful and holds a lot of sway, I think, in our readings and things that we explore. And finally, priests. Everyone that wears a collar and interacts with somebody with a collar knows that there is a hard, difficult history behind that. We hear all the time stories of people that were in abusive marriages and petition their priest saying, I'm in a very bad spot. I really need to be have this marriage annulled, and being told, no, your job is to go back and deal with this abuse. It is your holy duty. And why are people doing these extreme things? It's for the promise of transcendence. It's a little bit of what Father Bray was talking about. People are looking for authentic experience. So it's easy to other this idea of saying, well, these are people long dead. Well, as people were you've probably figured out by now, I'm speaking as a cult survivor. Every time I had an experience that was blatantly abusive, whether publicly or privately, when I thought about leaving that situation, because that would be the rational thing to do, I would then just sort of relax in the idea, well, this is what you need to do to live a rich and profound spiritual life. The ascetics, the monastics, the martyrs, they all went through things way worse than what I'm going through. So it must be good. This must be the way. This must be the road. And, when Father Bray was talking about people want to lift heavy things, that's true. And people also carry this history of thinking what a spiritual life looks like. So I think it's really important for us to look it in the face, but also when we see it walk through the door, to be like, are you sure you really want that? So you may have heard His Eminence refer that I showed up on the doorstep 10 years earlier than when I started. That's absolutely true. I came to a service. I loved the ideas that were happening in the Gnostic Church, and we got in the car and I turned to my husband. I said, well, these people aren't going to fix me. I need to find somebody that will. And what happened was then probably about 6 months later, we moved to another country, and I found somebody that said, yes, I can fix you. I can do it in a Christian context. We are a modern day monastic order, and all of that stuff you ever read previously about obedience, we've got that in spades, and we promise transcendence. And on one hand, they delivered. I had profound spiritual experiences that I will hold deeply in my heart for the rest of my life. And it also cost me a great deal. and I had some really painful experiences, and it took me a long time to come out of that. I was involved for 7 years. Our history, it wasn't just me. Our history, as part of the Christian umbrella, deeply informed my tolerance of abuse. I thought that that's how we related to one another on the spiritual path based on these different things. And I know I wasn't alone because my brothers and sisters in that community talked about it all the time. We read these works all the time to reinforce that this is how you related to one another on a spiritual path. And, I deeply love community. That's why I'm here doing what I'm doing. I'm deeply invested in it, but I think it's important to take a really hard look at how these things can impact people and how these things relate to one another. Finally, remediating actions. It's not hopeless, There's an excellent resource that I highly recommend to anybody wanting to learn more about this called Cults in Our Midst. And she really goes into the difference between cults and high demand organizations. So she talks a lot about how the Marines are actually not a cult. They are high demand. They're extremely difficult to deal with. However, people know what they're signing up for. When they walk through the doors, they know what they're getting into. There's no bait and switch in that. She also talks about how vulnerable everyone is to cultic situations. Everyone in my community were really well educated. All of us pursued advanced degrees. That my cult experience is why I have an MBA. This was not a situation where we were just sort of shuffled into it. Let me rephrase that. Very few of us were part of the cult because of our families of origin. We were part of it because we wanted something. We wanted to be part of something bigger than ourselves. Highly recommend reading this book. Finally, when somebody new comes to your community, I think we're pretty good at this, but always just paying attention. So are we fully telling them what's happening? So one thing that cults will do often across all sorts of denominations, Christian, non-Christian, whatever these crazy aliens, whatever they look like, is here, do a meditation class. And then the proximity increases to the exclusion of all other things. So when you're looking to grow the church, we were talking about this a couple of times yesterday. When we're looking to grow the church, make sure that we're doing it with full disclosure, that everyone's eyes are wide open, that these are the expectations we'll have as we grow in seminary. If that's something you choose, these are the expectations of that. There's no bait and switch. One thing that happened in my relationship, so my husband and I, we've been together for 17 years, which means that we were together before the cult, we were together through and after. So he also has cult trauma, even though he wasn't a part like I was. But His Eminence had a conversation with my spouse saying, hey, if anything's feeling bad or out of control, please tell us. The family is important. This kind of disclosure never happens in cultic organizations. So at the risk of over disclosing, maybe sometimes, again, have these conversations with people when they feel ready. The other thing that Margaret really recommends is people in transition are extremely vulnerable. So if somebody comes into your community and they are fresh off a divorce, fresh off of graduation of any kind, empty nesting, move to a new city, that people are very sensitive, much more than they realize in that time. So as ministers, it's an invitation for us to hold that space for them. If somebody comes in, I've just moved and I've changed my whole life and I want to get involved with absolutely everything, it's okay to sort of help them take a breath, not in a dismissive way, but just holding that vulnerability for them in a way that's really trauma aware. In a sense, moving is a trauma. It may be a good one, but it can be traumatic. So just again, always remembering that people tend to look for a new spiritual community when they're in transition, and knowing how vulnerable of a time that is. And finally, deep listening, as we talked about in the spiritual direction course. I can say from my experience that I showed up to my organization previously with, they said, we can take you fast. So no matter what, we're going to go fast. And I said, yes, that's exactly what I want. But really what I wanted was to be part of something that didn't require letting go of anything. It didn't require these sort of extreme things. I just wanted to be heard. So when people come to the community, deeply listen to them. You don't have to sort of dump on them all these things to make your spiritual life happen. Their spiritual life will happen in a way that's right for them. We do a really great job of making sure that lots of different perspectives are welcome and open. I mean, the fact that we do these conclaves where we have outside speakers is hugely important, and all of these outside perspectives really keep the cult, outside perspective a day keeps the cult away kind of idea. But deeply listening to people and letting them lead the journey, as opposed to out of your enthusiasm leading it for them. One thing I found in my previous experience, and I've heard from, I tend to pay attention to what's happened in other cults, is, the minister may not have started off wanting a cult. The minister may have just wanted to really help someone and knew that thing really helped them. But will it help the person in front of you? If it helped you, will it really help them? Will your deep listening be the thing that reveals what they need actually? These are just questions that I think are worth asking. Again, I give this talk in the spirit of love and looking at the shadow of spiritual community. And that's all I have on this. And I wanted to leave lots of time for questions or comments.
Okay, let me turn this off so we can get everybody in view. Okay, there we go. I did want to say, number one, that was excellent. And always timely and helpful. I mean, there's never there's never a time where that's not helpful, right? Because these things have popped up over 2,000 years and can continue to do so. One of the things I was going to add is I think there's also, on the positive side of history, where you see where history can create and reinforce this stuff. One of the things I was talking about in the Q&A was also taking a look at the long arc of history and appreciating its slowness or its pace. I think one of the things we have to look out for, particularly because we're small and particularly because our clergy invest their own time, money, and heart into it, is we also have to be mindful that we don't kind of, we don't get so boiled over by the enthusiasm and happiness of having new people walk in the door. And this connects to something, with cults they call love bombing, of course. But that we don't kind of take that a step further and almost develop a kind of self-reinforcing, well-intended but still negative codependency, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, in the arc of my history, right, I've been serving in the priesthood in the AJC for 20 years. I remember a time where not a single person in this call was in the church. I remember that, and I remember the feast and the famine, and people come and go, and people need to be okay with that. We don't need to grasp too tightly or to seek control or to be, in a sense, everything to all people, where we are, I mean, because the cult aspect goes two ways. It isn't just a matter of control from the clergy or the laity. It's also the laity and the institution after a fashion, right? We need to be prepared to to let people go. I remember a time when nobody was here. And while it would suck if there was nobody here again, I'm perfectly prepared to continue on doing my work. If everybody here goes away. And at the same point in time, the same way, flipping that over, the community needs to be able to live without me, right? Mm-hmm. And needs to have a sense of its own connection. Something that I've talked internally about for years is the hub of the wheel problem, right? When everybody's connected to you, but not to each other, if you knock out that center, the whole thing falls apart. So mm-hmm. people need to have their own reasons to be here and their own connection and their own activities. Because if they're just coming for one specific person, one specific teaching, one specific teacher, if anything threatens that, you have despondency, schism, any number of things, right? So, we need to appreciate each other while we walk together in that journey. And we need to also be prepared and draw from that the strength by which to walk alone. Mm-hmm. So, and I find that's important. I also find it's not always talked about. That the thing goes two ways. And I think sometimes, we can be well-intended, but too pleasing and too bending over backward. I mean, I work in a major trauma center. And so, and everybody I talk to, their patient is the most important. But from my chair, I have 1,000 patients, whereas they might have 50, right? And so you have to balance those needs. You have to balance the needs of your parishioners, right? You can't play favorites, all that kind of stuff. But anyway, you get the gist of what I'm saying. My dog is going nuts. So I'm going to go back on mute. Christina had her hand up.
I just want to respond to one thing quickly that you said, and then I'm really excited to hear what Christina has to say. Some of the worst abuses that we did to each other was in the spirit of trying to help one another. We wholeheartedly wanted to support one another in our spiritual journeys, and sometimes that went really wrong. It was unkind and unhelpful. And so to just always remember in our enthusiasm to not go overboard and to really sit back and let the person, go that's walking their own path to walk their own path and be a companion rather than a guide to it. Anyway, Christina.
Thank you for your talk. First of all, I found it very simple and mirthful way of outlining the issue. And of course, thank you for sharing your experience with us. And I always applaud the AGC clergy for being mindful, for being able to retrospect, to be able to think about their own actions. I think that is very, very rare. Mm-hmm. One observation that I've seen crop up lately, and in terms of people being vulnerable and then aligning themselves with the cult mentality, is people that are sick and changing their diets drastically, this fasting fad that we've had going on, and even veganism, depends on the extreme you take it to, but I have seen that crop up a lot in my circle of friends and acquaintances, in that they've gone on these fad diets, and then all of a sudden they're aligning themselves with conspiracy theories.
No, that's the thing, is that cultiness is very slippery. I can say that when I joined, we were fringy culty, but by the time I left, we were full-blown crazy culty, and it was heartbreaking. It was absolutely heartbreaking when that became apparent, and you don't see it coming. You really don't when you're in it. And it's sort of one thing that Margaret talks about too is cult in the workplace, that there's all these sort of workplace improvements or productivity improvements, and they're actually really culty, and they require a lot of groupthink and a lot of engagement that way. And again, I recommend reading the book even for that reason, independent of the spiritual side. Just how slippery it is, and even from group to group. So you may not be involved in a particular cult, but you've got friends that are sort of starting to get on that fringe. You're like, what's happening with that? also within an organization like AJC, one parish may not be at all culty, and one can be sort of sliding slowly into that direction. So it's important to pay attention if that starts to happen. If you are, cults are also reinforced by the laity. It's not just top down, it's also bottom up, reinforcing that group think. So in your community, being able to have that moment of reflection, being like, was that a culty thing? And even if it wasn't, having the space to have that conversation, I think, is really important for preventing it. The best offense, the best defense is a good offense. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
You're great.
I just wanted to actually relate something that happened with some frequency a few years ago that struck me in your talk, that we try to be very transparent. We try to be very, very clear about who we are and how we approach things. And because we often don't take solid stances on a whole lot of very, very important issues, that sometimes gets misinterpreted as a lack of transparency. And it occurs to me, listening to you, that might be because of some of the experiences that people have had with organizations that are sort of tending towards this cultic attitude. I remember some years ago on the Facebook page, we had somebody who came in and asked what we believed about, I want to say it was the afterlife. And we sort of, as we always do, sort of, said, well, we don't have a fixed idea. And so we kept pushing and saying, well, do you believe this? Do you believe that? And we kept sort of pushing back and saying, no, we don't hold a particular position on this. And it finally exploded into this accusation of, well, why don't you want people to know what it is that you believe? And only now am I sort of contextualizing that and saying, wow, okay, maybe that's the result of an experience that this person had of an organization that did that kind of bait and switch.
Yeah.
And the light bulb sort of went on for me in this really interesting way and so I think that one of the biggest takeaways for me from this is to be sensitive to the way in which people's experiences with organizations like this can shape the way that they view my actions. I mean, particularly as somebody who's sitting in a position of authority, that my actions, I need to be keenly aware, not just of how my actions are going to be interpreted, but how they might be misinterpreted through nobody's fault. Because of people's experiences. So I just wanted to say that this was just strikingly enlightening for me, and I really want to thank you for the honesty and the candor of your presentation. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Before I pass the baton over to Jason, I just wanted to note that Bishop Tim made a comment in the chat saying that not telling people what to believe is actually a very odd behavior for a church. Jason, go for it.
Well, even kind of leaping off of that, because I think that's a great comment, is that as somebody who's sat at a lot of dinner tables and had people come in, and I kind of mentioned this with the talk on evangelicalism as well, is that I find a lot of people have come in looking for us to give answers, and that there was something, Angie, you said about letting them speak, letting people coming in speak rather than giving them that answer. I guess it's just something that I'm finding really echoed here, and how part of what appealed to me about the AJC process was that it was exactly what Tim was saying, is that they're not telling you what to do, but how often I have seen people come through the door who are kind of looking to be somewhat told, and just, I guess, this is a terrible question because it's not ending in a question mark, but yeah, like I think it's an interesting question about what's the interplay there between not, like, I'm thinking of the folks who come in and want us to say, yes, you're totally right about the lizard people, you know.
Yeah.
And sorry, the quick thing there is that, like, normally I've been part of the process to say, actually, there's no lizard people, like, smack it down, read it right immediately. But what if instead of saying, yes, you're right, there's lizard people, but what if I was saying, like, yeah, the world can seem dark and scary? Like, if I was kind of acknowledging, if there's that middle ground between not accepting what they're saying at face value and or giving them the rubber stamp validation, but is there also like an emotional listening that can happen there?
Yeah, I think there's two things that are happening. One, I know, I'll just speak from my own experience when I entered into a budding cult. Having somebody tell you, I know the truth and I know how to get you to the transcendent experience that you want is very relaxing. And then delivering on that transcendent experience is also very relaxing. We're not going to do that for anyone. So we're never going to be able to fill that void. And, you know, I would say at the, going through the experience that I went through, that's fantastic. That's wonderful. Let's not do that. Let's not ever take on that. But what you're saying was echoed a little bit in the spiritual direction talk where forgive me for forgetting the person's name. I deeply love their talk. But well, what does that feel like to you? What is trying to speak through you is exactly what you said. Now, that can be a bit trickier in a one-off conversation at supper time, because that's a level of intimacy that would almost be appropriate for that initial conversation. So how do we navigate that? And also, like, if we're in full reptilian territory, like, I think we're probably not the right group. But there are other questions about the afterlife per se that maybe we could be a bit more exploratory without giving a full answer. Does that help you, Jason?
Yeah, 100%. Thank you.
Yeah, and what's going to require is being more exploratory in ourselves. Because we all have a sense of what it could be. But having that deep empathy of what it could be for others. I think we have room to do that in this organization, which a lot of organizations don't have. That's what Joe was talking about. There's not room to do that in a lot of organizations. So that's our unique thing that we have to offer. Maybe we don't give an answer, but we give space for exploration while giving maybe a few different options to try on, and saying with all of them, you get, I don't know, it's a mess, but these things are never easily answered, but and nothing about what we do is quick, but I think there is room for growth. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, Park.
Thank you. I just wanted to call out a phrase I think you used at one point in your talk that seemed really important to me, which was trauma informed. And I don't know in the seminary whether that's something that's explored in much depth, but it's certainly I'm a psychologist, I'm in the field of psychology, so I'm aware of that's an emerging category over the last, say, 10 years, and it's super important for for educational organizations and certainly for churches to really understand how often people are coming into an organization, or maybe have been there all along, who have been very much formed by traumatic experiences, and to be really aware of that and respectful of that and skillful with that seems essential for not falling into these kinds of errors. So I really appreciate you bringing that awareness to the group.
Well, I'm trying to explore my own trauma around it while having a full and rich spiritual life in a spiritual community. Navigating that bridge, it will continue to be a journey for the rest of my life, and hopefully I take some of my trauma and use it for good. That's my hope for what we're doing here. Yeah. Thank you.
Monsignor Scott.
Reverend Deacon, excellent talk. I really appreciated this, and I have been trying to study how to build community over the past 10 years, and your diagram had the best and most succinct explanation of what it takes to be a community, and it's not out there. I mean, when you look at building a church community and look at building an organization, they don't talk about that stuff. They talk about belonging and identity and all of this kind of thing. And those 6 qualities that you listed were just amazing, and just the right sort of light touch, you know, that we as a Johannite community could have, that belonging, that sameness, where we talk about being orthopraxic, where wherever you go to a Johannite community, you're going to have the archangels summoned at the beginning. And so that's the sameness that's in there, but we don't all have to look the same. We don't all have to dress the same. So we have enough sameness for an identity, but not so much that it's controlling or smothering. And that those 6 points that you had laid out there, just amazing for conceptualizing the sorts of things that we should be doing. And so I understand it wasn't the point of your talk, but you
no, it was actually.
Oh, okay.
Like a combination. It's a combination, because what had happened was, you know, I went to these parenting classes on attachment parenting, and I came home and I was like, that feels so familiar. And then I started going through the being like, oh, well, that's how, okay, that's what happened. Oh, so we built these roots in this way. And then it went a little weird. And so I've been really processing that for about 5 years now of just sort of noticing that parallel of like, well, that's how you build a family. And then that's also how you build a community. And then that's how communities get weird. So yeah, it's been an interesting exploration. And no, you don't see it organizationally, because I think it comes from a place of deeper intimacy.
Right.
And so then we have to be really gentle with that intimacy that we have in spiritual community.
And Bishop Tim's formulation of us being the household of John lends itself to that sort of formulation. It really lends itself to having that love and care, but also that sameness, but also that significance. And I loved that image, and that is great. I'm going to use that in so many places. So thank you very much.
I highly recommend that if any of you have any kind of relationship with anybody else, to look at Gordon Neufeld and his Roots of Attachment. They are extremely helpful and transitional. Like they apply to so many different contexts. Yeah. And I got a thumbs up from somebody that does this professionally. So thank you.
Thank you very, very much.
Any other questions, comments? No? Okay.
I do, actually.
Okay.
Okay.
This is only tangentially related, and I apologize for that, but in the past several years, I have been looking at kind of cult formation as a process, like looking into what, I mean, not in any serious way. My goal is to explore that and to see if there is anything worth using in that process. What do you see in cult formation, group formation in general? Let's say, is there anything you can take from the formation of an unhealthy group that is useful for a healthy group?
Yeah. Sort of fortunately and unfortunately, I take a lot. I think I'm going to get a little emotional during this part, actually, because, the depth that I cared about the people I was with, I will never experience something like that again. And I am eternally grateful for it. And it also took a chunk out of me, but my ability to care about people deepened in a way that I never imagined possible. When I went in, I was actually pretty cold. I think people did describe me as cold a lot. And, people don't say that about me anymore. I can know that they did teach me how to care in a way that I never expected. And I will use in my ministry, I will check myself constantly, but that they opened a pathway in me that was really special. Also, my love for the Eucharist. We did communion every single morning at 6 o'clock, no matter what, no matter what. And it just about killed all of us for a variety, sleep deprivation, the whole thing was involved. But my love for the Eucharist is why I'm here. That will always be a part of me, and why I want to be a priest, that I get to keep that. They gave it to me and I get to keep it. So there are some things like that were really special and will remain really special. And you can't, I was involved for 7 years. You're not involved for 7 years because you're getting nothing, because you're just getting abused, right? You're involved for that long because it touched me, and it touched I'm still in contact with a lot of people that left, and we're constantly battling, how do we separate the wheat from the chaff? How do we take that experience that in a lot of ways broke us and use it to give meaning to our new life? It's a constant thing. But that ability to care for people, that's mine now. My love for the Eucharist, that's mine now. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
I wanted to add in something there, talking about taking out the positives. Something that I've remarked on, internally and externally in a variety of venues and situations, at least across the pandemic, of course, is the process of spiritual alchemy. Like it or not, the spiritual, personal, mental, physical, emotional lead will accrue at our doors, whether we ask for it or not. And you can transmute it into gold, or you can be poisoned by it. Mm-hmm. Bitterness, resentment, replicating those behaviors, any number of things. It's there. You can't ignore it, right? Because it'll seep into everything, right? So you kind of have to transform it. So, for folks coming out of that situation, it's not a question so much of, can I use this? Is that you must find a way to use it in a healthy way, mm-hmm. right? You must come to a measure of reconciliation and peace with it from, the standpoint of standing in the present and facing your own future and interacting with everybody else that you serve on behalf of, right? So, there's that thing about physician heal thyself. Well, we have to, right? In order, if we're going to be able to healthily care for other people, or to not, transmit it. I mean, you could even throw in the phrase "break the cycle." Right? Yeah. So, so I think that's important, and the fact that you're willing to acknowledge that it wasn't all crap, it wasn't all bad, it was useful. That there were. This isn't an abstract thing. There were real people involved, mm-hmm. real, honest, caring people who cared deeply and had their own real reasons for wanting to do something real, right? And those things don't go away. So I think one of the nice things about hearing about your experience, particularly in that context, is it isn't just slides on a screen. There's a little bit of there's an experiential demonstration that you're working on the process that you're advocating. Mm-hmm. And for me, that's as powerful as the talk itself. So thank you for sharing that. I know that it can't be, and it won't be easy, and it may not fully go away, but at the same time, it gives you something to work with, right?
For sure.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Absolutely.